It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman, coming to you in May of 2023 from Atlanta in the Muskogee Creek Territory and former Red Wolf Territory in the Piedmont region that's the foothills of the Appalachian Mountain Range. Today, we're going to be talking about coyotes living in metro Atlanta and the Southeast region in terms of natural history and their role in ecosystems and the unfairness of Georgia's open season hunting policies for coyotes, as well as sharing tips for coexisting with coyotes in our neighborhoods. Our guest is a biology professor at Berry College, Dr. Chris Mowry, co-founder of the Atlanta Coyote Project. Let me tell you a little bit about that project and him. The Atlanta Coyote Project consists of scientists devoted to learning more about coyotes and their role in urban ecosystems. Whether you're captivated, concerned, or just plain curious when it comes to coyotes, the Atlanta Coyote Project strives to be a relevant and credible source of information and research, and to provide tangible strategies for avoiding human-coyote conflict. Their website is atlantacoyoteproject.org, and there's a button there where you can report a coyote sighting or share photos and videos of local coyote families. Our guest today is Dr. Chris Mowry, who co-founded the Atlanta Coyote Project with fellow biologist Dr. Larry Wilson in 2014. Dr. Mowry is a professor of biology at Berry College who teaches undergraduate courses in zoology, behavioral ecology, and conservation biology. He earned his PhD in biology from Emory University and has been a resident of Metro Atlanta since the early 1980s. As an animal ecologist, he studies both African primates and coyotes. His coyote research spans over 20 years. Welcome, Dr. Mowry.
Thank you for having me, Carrie. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, good to have you back. Now, I wanted to start with you telling us some natural history of the coyote and other wild canine species in North America prior to European colonization, particularly which canine species were in the southeast region of North America many centuries ago, and how human activities have changed their populations and territories over time.
Right. This is very important about this portion of the story of the coyote. So the coyote is endemic to North America. That means we find it only in North America, and it was an animal that historically was west of the Mississippi River from at least over the last 10,000 years or so. So it was an animal that was found and really on the plains of North America. Here in the southeast, we had red wolves, so cousins to coyote, same genus, Canis, but a different species. So the coyote is Canis latrans, and the red wolf is Canis rufus. And then out west was the gray wolf, Canis lupus. And so the coyote and the gray wolf co-evolved together. And really all of these animals, the coyote, the red wolf, and then the domestic dog, which is Canis familiaris, all of these animals came out of the gray wolf, Canis lupus. So that's the common ancestor that is shared by all of these animals.
Okay. And then is it true that we didn't really used to have coyotes in this area, like where we live in Georgia, but we used to have red wolves, but then they're not here anymore, and now coyotes are.
That's right. So again, coyotes were west of the Mississippi River, and so here we had red wolves, as you say, here in the southeast, and unfortunately, the red wolf was extirpated, is the word that we use as biologists, and that means it was essentially eliminated from its native habitat, and that elimination was due to human activity. So we trapped them, we poisoned them, we killed them, and till essentially they were all gone. There were just a few that remained. Those few remaining animals ended up in the southern Louisiana, southern Texas, and those animals were all captured. These are red wolves that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Were captured in the late 70s, early 80s, and were eventually their progeny were taken to coastal North Carolina. So they're the only place in the world where there are wild red wolves is coastal North Carolina, a place called Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And there are only about 30 to 35 animals, red wolves there. But anyway, that created a
Sad.
vacuum essentially in the
Yeah.
southeast that the coyote very easily filled. So the only thing that was keeping the coyote out of the Southeast was the red wolf. They were competitors, and the red wolf kept them out. So the coyote didn't come in. But once there are no more red wolves, coyote easily filled that niche.
Yeah. And how long have coyotes been in the southeast region of North America, would you say?
Yeah, so it was a slow immigration over
Yeah.
50 years. So coyotes started to move in probably, during the last maybe 70 years, 70,
Mhm.
60 years. They got to Georgia, as far as we can tell, probably in the 1970s, kind of slowly but surely made their way east. And so now the coyote is found in every state of the United States. They're except for Hawaii. They
Yeah.
don't they're good swimmers, but they haven't
Not
swum
that
to
good.
Hawaii yet. But they're found in every state. They're found throughout Central America. They're found up into Canada. They're knocking on the door of South America, so they'll
Mm,
they'll probably get into South America eventually. But this is really a natural progression
right.
again as we have eliminated their competitors, and this happens a lot in the world. We
Yeah.
eliminate competitors, and species move around.
Right. And in looking at the Georgia Department of Natural Resources hunting policies, I was upset to read that they label coyotes as a quote unquote invasive species and therefore declare open season on hunting coyotes year round with no limits to the number of individuals people can kill, people who have a hunting or trapping license. Dr. Mowry, what's your take on the rather hostile stance the Georgia Department of Natural Resources has taken on coyotes related to hunting and trapping in our state?
Well, we disagree with the characterization of the coyote as an invasive species. Invasive, as you say, suggests they're doing damage, that they don't belong here. And again, as I've explained, these animals are here really through our actions, the loss of their competitor, the red wolf, and in fact, if you go back far enough, tens of thousands of years, we see fossilized remains of coyotes in the east.
Hmm,
So it suggests that coyotes were in the East at one point. I guess the main point, though, is that there has always been sort of a top canid predator in the
right.
Southeast throughout North America. Whether it was the gray wolf, the red wolf, the coyote is now somewhat filling that niche in the Southeast. It's not the same, it's a smaller animal than a red wolf is. It requires less territory, it eats smaller foods, it eats a wider variety of foods. So it's not necessarily comparing apples to apples, but it is a canid predator. It's a smaller animal, as I say, than the red wolf, but it's likely serving as the what we call the apex or the top predator. And predators are a part of any healthy ecosystem. They're an important part of any healthy ecosystem. And so to characterize the coyote as invasive, again, really does it a disservice because it does serve a role in our southeastern ecosystems. It helps to keep other species in check, for example.
And actually, I myself wrote to the Georgia DNR, Department of Natural Resources, and asked them to take coyotes off the invasive species list so that that's a potential campaign I was thinking that we could start as citizens so we could all start getting more involved in the hunting and trapping policies for wildlife in our area. Just FYI, other species in the Georgia that the Georgia authorities say are okay for hunters to kill at nauseum are beavers, hogs, armadillos, groundhogs, starlings, pigeons, and English sparrows. So those are some of the other individuals we Georgians might want to advocate for. But Dr. Mowry, just because a species is not a longtime resident of a region and they've migrated here over the years doesn't necessarily mean their presence is damaging in terms of use of the word invasive. Um, I really don't like that term. And as you were describing, in this case, having a wild canine species in the ecosystem in this area has been natural to the area. And also, again, the term invasive implies we need to remove them, perhaps, because it would be ecologically justified to remove them. But I know that you've done some research that's shown the role coyotes play in Georgia's ecosystem. And could you tell us about whether it's more productive or more damaging in terms of the role coyotes play?
Right. Well, we did publish a paper a few years ago looking at the role of coyotes in the ecosystem. And so, what we found is actually a high level of biodiversity in an area where we knew that there was an active coyote family. There was reproduction, small litter sizes each year, and we saw high biodiversity. 12 different species of mammals, high bird biodiversity, a number of species of reptiles. And so this really fits with what we know is sort of classic ecological theory. Again, is that predators are an important component of ecosystems. They, again, as I mentioned before, they help to control species that are further down on the food chain. So in this case, rodents, for example, small mammals that coyotes eat. And so no one species becomes overabundant and outcompetes other species. And there are plenty of examples in nature that ecologists have studied that show the loss or the absence of a
Mhm.
predator means again that these species lower down on the food chain can proliferate unchecked and usually drive some of the other species to extinction through what we call competitive exclusion. So,
Mhm.
so again, the coyote is a part of the ecosystem, and it is performing this function, this beneficial function.
Yeah, I'm glad you and others, scientists have been able to figure that out and showcase that that the role they're playing is productive. And I know that you have a lot of video observations of coyotes in Georgia that either you've taken or people will send you through the Atlanta Coyote Project.org website. What have some of your video observations revealed in terms of how coyotes live and what their family lives are like?
Well, I often say that coyote family groups are just very similar to human family groups, to some
Oh,
human family groups. And so it's a small nuclear family group. And so it's what we call the alpha male and female. It's really the mom and dad, and then their offspring, their pups. They're very seasonal breeders. They breed in the wintertime, and so they give birth in the spring. And the litter size is can be anywhere from 2 to 7 or 8 or
wow.
maybe more. But those pups will stay with their parents for a few months, and then usually by the end of the summer into the fall, they begin to disperse, and eventually all of them will typically leave the family group, the natal group, as we say, and the mom and dad will mate for life. They will stay together and they will maintain the territory that they have established, and then they might have a new litter of pups the next year. Now, some of those pups from the previous year might stick around and help to raise their younger brothers and sisters. That's a very common thing that we see in lots of animal species. Bald eagles, for example, will do this. And so, but it's a nuclear family, and I think that's um, not something that most people are aware of. We oftentimes use coyote pack, or people will use that
Yeah.
term, but it's really sort of a misnomer because it's a group of individuals who are all related, mom and dad, and then their kids, and the kids leave, and then it might start over again. But I guess I'll just end by saying that the size of the litter, the size of the family, is dependent on several things. It's just the mom and dad who are breeding. They are suppressing breeding in their offspring. They've got to go off and find their own territory and mate, and unless something disrupts that stable family group. And then it's also dependent upon resources. What
Yeah.
resources are available? And that's just a biological fact. The amount of resources dictates how many of your offspring you can have and how many will survive. And so when we
Yeah.
as humans provide more resources, that creates a situation where there can be more coyotes.
And when you look at the video footage of these families, kind of what do you see them doing? Are they ever playful? like our dogs are playful, or are they always kind of going about their business like, trying to find water, trying to find food?
Yeah, those are good questions. And I'll say, first of all, that the coyotes don't easily reveal themselves.
Uh,
And so they're not seen all that often.
oh,
People do see them occasionally, and it's usually at first they're confused that it doesn't register. They think it's a dog, they think it's a German Shepherd. And then so we don't often see coyotes. We see them occasionally, but we don't often see them. But they can be very playful. They're very doting parents. That's one of the things, is that
mhm,
both the mom and the dad are involved in rearing the offspring. And then, as I said, older brothers and sisters can also help to raise the offspring. They usually keep out of sight, particularly here in the Southeast during the hot months. So during daytime hours, we generally don't see them. That doesn't mean that seeing a coyote during the day is cause for concern necessarily. It's just simply that these animals, in places where there are people who are likely to see them, they don't want anything to do with us. So
right.
they stay out of sight. They're less active when it's hot. They're going to be, do the things that they need to do, like look for food and water and patrol their territory. Usually that's done during the evening hours
Mm,
or overnight or dawn and dusk. We call that being crepuscular. That's an activity. So
yeah,
that's the one of the things that makes coyotes so successful, is they're very adaptable in their behavior and when they're active or inactive. So yeah, so they're probably, doing little during the day, and then at night they're out there kind of doing their coyote things again, looking
yeah.
for food, patrolling their territory.
If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature, and I'm host Carrie Freeman, talking about the Atlanta Coyote Project with its founder, biologist Dr. Chris Mowry of Berry College. The website is atlantacoyoteproject.org. Dr. Mowry, some of our listeners may see coyotes in their neighborhood, or they'll hear neighbors on the next door email listserv expressing fear about seeing coyotes. What is a constructive way to respond to people's concerns and to promote coexistence with coyotes in our neighborhoods where they have been spotted?
Right. Well, our research has shown that there are coyotes everywhere we look. Not large numbers of coyotes, but they are present. And so when we see them on our cameras, we generally see one, maybe two at most. So the seeing a coyote is not cause for concern. They're not out to get us. However, they are wild animals and they should be treated as such. So the best advice that we can give is, don't provide food, whether intentionally or unintentionally, for coyotes. And usually that food that we see being provided is in the form of people leaving pet food outside. So people
Right.
that feed their cats or their dogs, or leave food outside for their pets, or perhaps for stray animals that they
Mm,
they think they're doing the right thing, and I know their heart's in the right place, but this is not good behavior, because coyotes don't know the difference. They This is not natural food item, but when they come across it, it's free food. They don't have to go looking for it. So that's the best advice we give, is just to secure your garbage,
awesome.
clean your grill, don't overfill bird feeders that might spill seed on the ground and
Mm,
attract rodents, don't leave pet food out, don't throw food out. If you have fruit trees, coyotes love fruits. If you have fruit trees and all of the fruits falling on the ground, you might want to rake that up, because it will attract coyotes and other animals for that matter. So that's a food resource as well. So it's really just, and then also keep your pets under control.
mhm.
Don't let your pets run freely. Pets are not natural food items for coyotes, but that's not to say that if they learn this behavior, they won't necessarily go after a small dog or a cat. They can do that. It's not typical behavior, but it can happen. And so be a responsible pet owner.
Right. Probably people may exaggerate if there has been one example of a cat or a small dog maybe being attacked or eaten. by a coyote somewhere, then everybody kind of blows it out of proportion as if coyotes are roaming around trying to, like, eat our dogs and cats, um, or come into our yard. But it's more about, like you're saying, opportunity. If we keep food around if you don't want coyotes in your yard, then don't have food around your house, because and it wouldn't be just the coyote, there'd be other animals, raccoons and other animals that are going to come in whenever you have food. And in some places in Georgia, you'd have bears coming, like, so you just have to be aware of that. Because sometimes you might have people get overreacting and saying, like, oh, well, we need to get somebody in here to kill the coyotes. I see a coyote, I'm scared about my dog. What can you say to somebody who thinks, oh, well, let's just get somebody in to get rid of the coyotes?
Right. We strongly advise doing that, because what happens is it creates this cycle of what we call unintended consequences. And so if somebody attempts to what we say lethally control a coyote population, so get a trapper to come in, first of all, it's difficult to do, it's expensive. A lot of people are ethically opposed to it, of course.
Yeah.
But what it ends up doing is it might, if successful, it might initially reduce the local coyote population. But as I've described, coyotes are very family oriented. There are strong social bonds. It's only the mom and dad who are breeding. And so trapping is never going to get rid of all of the coyotes. If you were to get rid of one of the parents, what that means is then the younger individuals have now been freed from being suppressed from breeding. And so now all bets are off. So you've got younger individuals breeding. Um, You've got a situation now where there are actually more resources
Mm.
available, because you got initially fewer coyotes, more resources. Now those coyotes that are still there are going to reproduce again. Maybe more individuals are reproducing. They're going to have larger litter sizes. And so what started out as an attempt to reduce the coyote population has backfired and has ultimately led to more coyotes, not fewer coyotes. So
Right.
most people don't quite understand this. And so it's really, these animals will control their own numbers. So the best advice, again, we have is to be a responsible citizen, control
Yeah.
access to resources. One other thing I might
Yeah.
add is that don't put out rat poison,
Ugh.
things like that. What these things often do will they'll get into the small rodent population.
Mhm.
Coyote might then eat something, or maybe a mouse or a rat that's ingested some of this, and this typically doesn't kill the coyote, but what it does is it reduces their immune response.
Mhm.
They end up getting something like mange, which we see fairly often. Now the animal, the coyote, is desperate, and this is when bad behavior starts. And so they're desperate, they're trying to survive. Now they're going to take more chances, like come onto porches and maybe kill cats and things like that. So it's just kind of this vicious cycle.
Wow, I'm glad you mentioned that, even though we're at the end and we're going to need to wrap up. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because in general, I just hate the idea of poisoning anyone. I don't like insecticides and, yeah, and any kind of poison for rodents and stuff. But so it's interesting that you're mentioning the ripple effect of putting out poisons for any animal and how it could interfere. And I also was thinking, when you're talking about people hiring trappers and hunters, just how not only does it not control, it's not going to get rid, quote unquote, of coyotes in the area, but also it disrupts the family life. Like, you've got partners that mate for life, and then you've just destroyed their family. So that's also, another way to look at it, and it's potentially another argument you could use if you're trying to talk to your neighbors about these things. But I know there's lots of resources on the Atlanta Coyote Project.org website. So, just as a wrap up, for listeners who are interested in helping out with the Atlanta Coyote Project, Dr. Mowry, what could they do to get involved?
Well, the number one thing I would say is just to educate yourself. And so most of what we've talked about, as you say here today, is on our website, atlantacoyoteproject.org. And so just simply educating yourself, watching some of our videos. There are documentaries on there, and then sharing this information with your neighbors,
Right.
particularly if a situation comes up and, as you say, on social media or next door, there's an outcry. Oh, we've seen a coyote. We need to do something. And being sort of the voice of reason, being an educated voice,
Yes.
and sharing this information with your neighbors really goes a long way. I think to calming the situation down and letting people make informed decisions.
Well, that's the end of our show, but I want to thank you, Chris Mowry, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for starting the Atlanta Coyote Project as an applied research tool for the community as it helps us better understand, appreciate, and protect coyotes.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for having me on.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. We post action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, facebook.com/intune to nature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia. And remember to take care of yourself and others, including other species, like coyotes and other urban wildlife. Thanks for listening. Cheers.